Hey guys, welcome to our very next unit, aggregate models, which is just a fancy way to say graphs that contain big concepts. Aggregate is a fancy way to say total, and models is usually another way to say graph. So this unit is the meat and potatoes of the course. Everything's going to come back down to this, which kind of comes back down to our last unit, which was economic indicators. Because these models, as you can see, based on our objective of this unit is to explore how changes in aggregate spending, or total spending, and production, economic fluctuations, which we talked about the business cycle in the last lesson, and how policy affects national income, unemployment, and inflation. So basically, how all the economic indicators relate to each other, how they affect each other, when one changes, what happens to the other ones. I do want to mention that national income right there is just another fancy way to say GDP. So if you see national income or something like that, that's going to be just a different way to say GDP. So don't let that trip you up. Let's quickly review that business cycle, those economic fluctuations that we just talked about. You see on the screen, there's, when GDP goes up, it's called expansion. Very top, it's called peak. When GDP starts to fall, it's either called a recession or contraction. And then when GDP is at its lowest, that is a trough. And there's lots of reasons why it fluctuates. That's probably one of the biggest questions I always get is why can't GDP always go up? Why can't there be great times ahead of us all the time? And why do recessions happen? And for several reasons. So the first thing is price stickiness, meaning prices are slow to adjust. If something were to happen in the economy that were to change a price of an input, like a price of an FOP, it's going to take a while before we see the results of that on the whole economy. So, what's happening now is due to changes of things that happened 6 months ago, a year ago, 5 years ago, even. So we're just seeing the results. So things fluctuate because we're having this after ripple effect. And supply shocks. This is just an unexpected change in production. Usually when some sort of resource changes. So think of like a natural disaster that might take out roads and bridges or wipe out like lumber or, oil, wheat, something like that. That is, maybe temporary, but an unexpected change. And then the business cycle is going to fluctuate because of something unexpected. Same thing with number 3 is something unexpected, but this is on the demand side. Instead of the supply production side, we have these unexpected spending changes. This could happen because of fear, the fear of a recession. This could happen because of a war. This could happen because of some sort of maybe stock market crash. Just recently, we've had unexpected spending changes because of coronavirus. And when people are maybe they're afraid that the economy's not going to be so great in the future, they're not going to go out and buy a new house or buy a big car or another big ticket item because they're afraid. And, no one could have expected that this is going to be as big as it has become, but it's definitely changed prices of things. I'm sure you are aware of like toilet paper changed in price. And it changes production of beef. If you've looked at beef prices recently, it's because we have a hard time maybe importing it, or it's just production is falling because of maybe spending changes. And so it's all kind of accumulating into this very fluctuating business cycle. So here is the graph that we are going to be using every day for the rest of the year, basically. And it's the aggregate supply and aggregate demand graph, or ASAD for short. And here's what it looks like. We're going to take it apart over the next few days of where we're just going to be looking at each individual line by itself, but just know that they do all go together all together. So we'll spend some time with just looking at maybe aggregate demand or short run aggregate supply, but they do go together. So I want you to draw this nice pretty picture that we're headed to. This is our goal of putting them all together. But on the y-axis is price level. Think of it as like inflation. We're not going to label it as inflation. For short, you can put PL, but for the very first time, you should probably put price level. For the x-axis, we have real GDP. You can also label that as Y, because we talked about that when we talked about GDP. You can abbreviate real GDP with the letter Y. I've also seen total output, national income, lots of different things that you can label the x-axis because they're all synonyms of each other. The aggregate demand curve is that yellow line. It's sloped downwards, labeled AD for short, for aggregate demand. Aggregate being total, so the total demand of the total spending of everybody. The blue line sloped upwards is short run aggregate supply. So this is total production levels in the short run. SRAS for short. That's how we're going to label it, SRAS. And then that green line is completely vertical, is touching the y-axis, the x-axis. It's all the way down, and that's long run aggregate supply, labeled LRAS, or long run aggregate supply. Where they intersect is long run equilibrium, where the green, the blue, and the yellow all intersect. So I want you to draw your equilibrium points, your boop, 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 all the way to the y-axis. And you would do the same thing down to the x-axis as well, but that green line's kind of already there. So we're not going to put those dotted equilibrium points on top of the solid line, but basically here's the equilibrium price level, and here's the equilibrium Q for quantity, quantity of all things being GDP. We're probably just going to label this 1 and 1, like the number 1. But you can put PL and Q, or PL and Y, or PL and real GDP. But this graph represents lots of different things: total spending, total production, the prices of things like inflation, and the GDP of a country. So we are now going to look further deeper into aggregate demand. Someone just came in the room and left. I have no idea who it was. I didn't turn around in time. I want to minimize the screen. Oh, hello. Okay, so we're back. I got a little stuck really quick. Okay, so for the next few days, we are just going to only think about that downward sloping line, that aggregate demand curve. And we need to kind of break it apart before we throw them all back together on the same graph. So aggregate demand is our total demand of all goods and services in the economy. It's all of our spending. So when I buy something, when businesses buy something, when the government buys something, when we buy like exports, or like foreigners buy our products, they buy their imports for them, but our exports, it's going to affect aggregate demand. So it is downward sloping. And if you know anything about graphs, a downward sloping line, or any line on a graph, represents a relationship. So let's talk about what kind of relationship a downward sloping line means. It means if one of these variables was to go up, the other variable would go down. They are inverses of each other. It is a negative relationship. That they're negatively related. So let's give an example. If prices go down, price level falls, we go from this point on our aggregate demand curve to this point on our aggregate demand curve, which means GDP goes up. But why? Why, if prices fall, does GDP go up? And vice versa, if prices were to go up, why would GDP fall? So let's just have this being point A, let's say, and then this being point B on a graph on our line. And there's 3 reasons. There's 3, we call them effects of aggregate demand. And the 3 effects explain why there's a negative relationship between price level and real GDP. And the first effect is called the wealth effect. So the wealth effect states that if prices fall, people feel wealthier. They're not wealthier. It's not like they make more money, but if prices fall, things are cheaper and they can buy more stuff with the same amount of money that they already had. Their purchasing power has gone up as prices go down, which means that they typically, even though they don't make more money, they might actually spend more money because it's like everything's on sale. And if prices fall and consumers feel wealthy because of it, they spend more money and GDP increases because consumption's going up. And it's also called the real balance effect, and it does work the other way. If prices were to go up, people feel less wealthy. Not that they're poor or anything, but their dollar doesn't go as far if things are too expensive, which means they probably buy less and GDP falls. So there's a negative relationship, an inverse relationship between price level and GDP. And that's one of the reasons why, the wealth effect. The second reason why is called the interest rate effect. Notice how this says price level. That's the price of all things, the price of a car, the price of a phone, the price of college education, the price of everything. So interest, we've talked about before. Remember, interest rates, interest rates is the price of a loan. Let's see, price of a loan. It's a loan price. It's really hard to write with a mouse, and it's really hard to write with a very thick pen tool. Okay, the price of a loan is an interest rate. And let's say prices fall. Let's look at these red arrows. If prices fall of everything, that includes interest rates. Prices fall, interest rates are going to fall because the price level is the price of everything, interest rates included. So if prices fall and interest rates fall, businesses might take out more loans than they had before because interest is cheaper. Their loan is cheaper, therefore it's like money's on sale. So they take out more loans and they buy more pizza ovens and more just capital. They maybe take their workers and they send them on a training program to increase their human capital. Any of those things is going to cause GDP to go up because that's it's more investment spending. So interest rate effect, basically prices fall, interest rates fall, businesses spend more money because interest rates are low and they can take out more loans, and GDP goes up. Of course, it also works in reverse. If prices go up, that includes interest rates, businesses take out less loans, they buy less things, GDP goes back down. So that's just another reason why there's an inverse relationship between price level and GDP. That's just looking through the eyes of a business owner. Now let's look at through the eyes of someone who buys our products who doesn't live in this country, like a foreigner. The exchange rate effect, if you can get that to go away, the exchange rate effect, can I do this? I don't think I can, but I'm gonna try it anyway. Oh, that worked. I'll take it. The exchange rate effect is looking through the eyes of net exports, XN. So while the wealth effect was dealing with like how consumers feel wealthier, interest rate effect was all about how businesses spend more because of prices, and then the exchange rate effect is about XN. And this one's kind of funny, a little silly. If prices were to go, all my arrows. Oh, all my arrows are backwards. Can I click and drag on the arrows? I'm going to have to go to not full screen anymore. Okay, we're back. So if prices fall, and let's be more specific, if prices fall in the United States, not only are we going to buy more, and that's the wealth effect, but foreigners are going to be buying more of our products. We're going to be exporting more to them because our stuff is cheap. They're going to be buying it, like our country's on sale. We export more, net exports goes up, GDP goes up. And that's just the last reason why if prices were to fall, GDP goes up. Not only because we buy more, wealth effect, or businesses buy more, interest rate effect, but foreigners also buy more, exchange rate effect. That's also called the net export effect. You might see that sometimes. And it all goes in reverse. It just is 3 reasons why the price level and GDP are downward sloping. Or at least they're inverses of each other, which causes a downward sloping line on a graph. So this is where I'm ending off today, why aggregate demand is downward sloping. We'll talk about what shifts this graph tomorrow, like what causes it to shift to the right, to the left, or not at all. And we'll talk about that tomorrow.